Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Keene, CEO of Holocaust Museum LA. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion of the film, Blessed is the Match, The Life and Death of Hannah Senesh. Holocaust Museum LA is actually the oldest Holocaust museum in the United States. We were founded by Holocaust survivors in 1961, and they wanted to create a safe space where they could remember their family members who perished, display their precious artifacts, and start educating young people, all free of charge. Today, the museum continues to teach the history and the lessons of the Holocaust, making it relevant to today's world, also free of charge. And we're reaching students and visitors from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of our founding survivors to commemorate, educate, and inspire. Holocaust Museum LA brings you programs like today's film and discussion at no charge. If you're enjoying our programs, we ask that you consider supporting our work by going to our website, holocaustmuseumla.org, to make a donation. We are honored to have with us today the director and producer of Blessed is the Match, Roberta Grossman, an award-winning filmmaker with a passion for history and social justice. Roberta Grossman has written, directed, and produced more than 40 hours of film and television. Grossman wrote, produced, and directed Who Will Write Our History, about Emanuel Ringelblum and the secret archives of the Warsaw Ghetto, co-produced by ART and NDR. In 2018, Grossman co-directed and produced the Netflix original documentary, Seeing Allred, about the women's rights attorney, Gloria Allred, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Grossman's 2012 Hava Nagila, the movie, uses the song Hava Nagila as a portal into 150 years of Jewish history, culture, and spirituality. The film we are discussing today, Blessed is the Match, The Life and Death of Hannah Senesh, was shortlisted for an Academy Award, aired on PBS, was nominated for a Primetime Emmy, and won the Audience Award at 13 Jewish film festivals. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Holocaust Museum LA's Vice President of Education and Exhibits, Jordanna Gessler, who will be moderating our discussion this evening. So I'd like to hand it over to you, Jordanna.
Thank you so much, Beth. And thank you, Roberta, for being here with us, and to everyone in the audience. I see that we are already getting scores of questions in the chat box. So you guys know the drill. If you have a question, put it in the chat box and we will definitely get to it. I wanted to start off by, Roberta, thank you so much for not only joining us, but for telling this important story. At Holocaust Museum LA, we talk about Hannah Senesh in 2 different galleries in the museum. Her story is just such an incredible one. I grew up with an Israeli father. Eli Eli is definitely a song of my childhood. And I'm just very honored to speak to you and learn more about how you brought her story to life and really brought it to an American audience.
All right, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. So there was a quote in the movie that small gestures can do big things that really, really resonated with me. And I was wondering how you think it represents Hannah Senesh, and what your opinion on it is.
Well, I think it's really interesting because the impact of Hannah's mission and of her sacrifice is very hard to wrap one's head around. But I think that if one looks at the symbolic role that she has played in terms of inspiring Israelis, inspiring parachutists, when I've gone to Israel, we were shooting, they all knew who Hannah Senesh was, very inspired by her. And also her willingness to throw herself literally into the fray is very inspiring. Was it worth her life in terms of what it ultimately resulted in the moment? I don't know. But when in an extreme circumstance, as like the Holocaust as it was unfolding at the time, I don't think we can look back and make those kind of judgments about what was a good thing to do, what wasn't a good thing to do. It was such an impossible situation. She did the only thing she could do. She had the opportunity to go and try to do something to organize Hungarian Jews, to warn them. And in particular, she was motivated by trying to reach her mother and to hopefully bring her out.
Yeah, I mean, I think just from some of the films I've seen of yours, that's a thread that I've noticed, is that you pick stories of individuals who might seem like they're doing a small task, but actually has a major ripple effect on impact.
Well, yeah, and I don't think we can necessarily know what the impact's going to be. I mean, I think that Emanuel Ringelblum, who was the historian who created and led the Warsaw Ghetto Archive, he knew the importance of creating an archive that could tell the story of the Warsaw Ghetto and of the Polish Jews and of the Holocaust from the Jewish perspective. He knew the enormous importance of this. What he didn't know was, number one, whether the archive would survive. Number two, you know, who would be there to read it on the other end. But I mean, the fact that that archive remained buried literally and figuratively for so many years does not lessen the fact that it was an enormous accomplishment. I personally wish that he had lived to 90 years old, and the same for Hannah. But on the other hand, you know, they both left legacies.
So do you think that you're particularly drawn to stories of resistance from the Holocaust? It looks like we just might have lost the connection with Roberta. Everyone hold tight. This is everything that we're doing right now with the pandemic and virtual world is bound to have issues. So let's just see if we can see this technological fix very quickly. She's back.
Hi, my computer died. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. No worries.
I just did on my phone, and hopefully my computer will come back to life. I heard a sound like my computer was crying, and then it was gone. So I hope that's not the end of my computer, but here I am, and I apologize for the interruption.
Oh, completely don't worry. I think we're all used to it in this day and age at this point. Technological changes are bound to happen. I was asking you a little bit about your interest in Holocaust resistance, or what is it that draws you to these specific stories?
You know, that's very interesting. They are both stories of Holocaust resistance, and I think I'm interested in stories of resistance. Interested in stories of individuals trying to do something, right? I mean, and we live in those kind of times now where, you know, most of us are wondering, what can we do? You know, the forces arrayed against the average person, the normal person just trying to live their lives, are so huge that I'm very inspired by those people who figure out a way that they can make a contribution to trying to make the world that they would like to see.
I understand through some of the research I did online that you first learned about Hannah Senesh when you were in high school or as a student. And I'm wondering how that impacted you. How did it resonate with you? Obviously, this was before you were a professional filmmaker. What about her story stayed with you to the part that you actually wanted to make a film about it?
Well, you know, I tried right out of college. I think I read her diary in junior high, and I was she just got in my bones, right? I mean, I loved her so much. I loved her poetry, I loved her diary, I loved her self-reflection, I loved her heroism, I loved her Zionism. And right out of college, I made my first effort to make a film about her, and I'm very happy that I wasn't able to get that off the ground, because it had to be at least 10, maybe 15 years later, maybe 20 years later, when I finally did make the film, and it came out in 2008. Because at that time, by that time, I was a lot older, I was a lot more mature, and most importantly, I was a mother and I had a young daughter. So I understood the story in a completely different way. And I related to the story from the point of view more of Hannah's mother, Catherine, than from the point of view of Hannah herself. And my daughter, who was only 8 at the time, I told her that if she ever, jumped out of an airplane behind enemy lines, into Nazi-held territory, like she was going to be punished for the rest of her life. And she said to me sometime later, when the film was done that she hoped I'd make a happy film next time. And that's why, one of the main reasons why I made Hannah and Giora the movie next. So she had a big influence on how that all happened. But I did really feel that Catherine was such a compelling character. And when I went back to the diary, there was an afterword by Catherine, and it was like 10 pages, a memoir of Hannah's life, from the time she was a child until their time they spent together in prison and Hannah's death. And if you recall, the film starts with Catherine's words. She's waiting on the dock with her son, Giora, as Hannah's body was being brought to I think by then it was Israel, not Palestine. She said, people often ask, if I'm the mother of Hannah Senesh, and how could I bear, whatever. So that's how the film starts. And really the whole film is based on her memoir.
The film, it feels as if it's a mother-daughter love story. And so is the fact that you were a mother, or was it this, I guess, prologue that really inspired you to tell the story through her mother's words?
I think it was both. It was the combination of both. And also I was a daughter as well. And my mother was still alive at that time, who I loved very much. And I could really relate to Hannah. She felt she had disappointed her mother in a way. She felt she had quarreled with her mother. She was so young when she left Hungary, Budapest, at the very last moment to go to Palestine before the war broke out. And she felt terribly guilty towards her mother. Her brother had gone to France and ultimately, arrived in Israel. And her mother was alone during all those terrible years. So she felt terribly guilty and wanted to rescue her, and to also just connect with her. And also the memoir was incredibly moving and well written. So those things just all came together.
And kind of in that same vein, what inspired you for the choice of the title of the film? There are so many incredible poems that Hannah Senesh wrote.
Well, it's what you noted a minute ago, right? About the one person who could do something, even though it might seem small. And she expresses it very well. She says, one candle can illuminate the darkness. And I thought it just exemplified what she did and who she was and the impact of her life and mission and writing.
Yeah, I loved the fact that you used her words as the title of the film, because I think that her words are something that's so powerful that we still have today and speaks to who she must have been as a person. Not that I can imagine, because I obviously didn't know her. We have a question from the audience about how many hours of film did it take to make this movie, to whittle it down into an hour and a half? And I guess maybe also you can speak to the process of narrowing it down.
I'm sorry to say I don't remember, but normally on average for an hour and a half's worth of film, we probably have somewhere between archival material, photographs, interviews with scholars, the dramatizations that I did, probably 60 to 80 or 90 hours of material. So it really is quite daunting. I think that there was a larger ratio for writer history. But that's kind of the way it is with, especially documentary films. So this film was more like a scripted film because we know the end of the story. And I did write the whole story beforehand. And of course it changes, in the editing room. But the process is just that, you write it once before you shoot, you write it when you're shooting, and you write it when you're editing. So it's a process of finding the point of view, finding the main story, refining how to, which pieces of Hannah's diaries to choose to help shape her character. And I actually wish I had included a few other things that showed more of her self-doubt and less of her bravado, because they're an equal measure in her diary, if not more self-doubt than bravado. And I really didn't want to show her as this brash, so sure of herself kind of person, because she may have presented that way, but internally that wasn't all that was going on. She was she was so young, and she was smart enough to doubt herself, which is great. And so that's the process. And of course, I work with a team, primarily with a writer in the editing room and an editor in the editing room. And so it's a process of, the three of us and all of our individual inputs shaping the story. There were also, producers on that who came in and gave their opinions. Marta Kaufman, the creator of Friends, she was one of the producers on the film. She is obviously very good at story, and she came in and watched and gave notes. So it's a very collaborative process, and 1 million screenings and 1 million cuts. Usually we do about 78 or 90 versions of the film before we say, okay, it's good enough, or as good as it's going to be, because at a certain point you start going backwards.
And, as somebody who works in a history museum, primary sources are so important to me in telling stories. And I was wondering if you can kind of walk us through the process that you went through. You have incredible archival footage. You have incredible interviews with people who knew Hannah, either her family or with her as a parachuter. So, how did you make these choices? Which artifact do you feel the most proud that you included? Which primary source do you feel, besides the diary, of course, the most influential part of this film?
Well, when I was answering the question about how the film was crafted, I failed to mention one of my main collaborator, which was Eitan Senesh, Hannah's nephew, her brother Giora's son. He had 2 sons. And Eitan Senesh was with me pretty much day and night for whatever it was, 3 or 4 years. And he was the one who was able to unlock the archive, because there were thousands of photographs in shoeboxes in a small little archive room of his house, of his apartment in Israel, that had never been cataloged, that had never been digitized. And so that was an unbelievable treasure trove. And actually it was those photographs that suggested to me the technique I used in the film of either going from a still to a live motion, just a gesture, or going from a live to a still. It was all based on the photographs. And it's kind of unusual because Hannah was a diarist, yes, but she was also a photographer from a very young age, and her brother took pictures. They had cameras. And that was one of her hobbies. So it was those photographs that I think were probably the most important thing for a film rather than a book. And her diary, and as I said, the mother's, Catherine's memoir, were the most important, sources. And then, through Eitan's help, I was able to find the people who were still alive who knew Hannah.
And so, kind of in that same vein, when you were putting together the film in your head and writing it, how did you decide which pieces of the story would be acted out?
Well, and part of it was, there's a certain rhythm where you need, if you decide on a visual technique like that, you can't have it at the beginning and have it at the end and not have it in the middle. There's a certain rhythm of when you need something. There's also, maybe it was a time when there was a lull in what I had either archivally to show or in storytelling, or there was such a fantastic photograph that spoke to me so strongly that I wanted to enhance it. So, for example, Hannah picking oranges I don't know if it was on her kibbutz or when she was in the agricultural training, picking oranges. And to me, there was such an iconic, early Zionist image of, back to the land and the oranges and all that I just, it just called out, because she was so in love with the idea of Israel, of Palestine, of the Zionist enterprise. And it was very unusual for Hungarian Jews to be Zionists. They were just far too comfortable and far too enmeshed. It just wasn't like in Poland, where every other person was either a Zionist or a Bundist or a communist. It wasn't like that, in her cosmopolitan world of Budapest.
I love your imagery of the oranges, because it's true. Especially, it's hard to imagine a world in which you can't have fruit wherever in the world you're living at whatever time, but it was something that so many European Jews talked about, like having fresh oranges in the land of Israel. And so I think that's it's a beautiful trope that you kind of pulled in there, metaphor for this yearning and longing to be able to celebrate the land. We have a few questions in the audience about her family, and I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to the history of how her family survived and how they got out and, their journey to Israel.
Well, her father died before the war. He was a very well-known playwright and writer, journalist. And her mother really survived because of Hannah, because when Hannah showed up in Hungary, in Budapest, she was arrested, and her mother was very quickly arrested as well. And they were in prison together. At first, they could only see each other across windows and that kind of thing when they happened to be together in the yard. But they did have some opportunities to talk and be together a bit. And because of her mother was in prison, she kind of missed the great the big deportation from Budapest, at the very end of the war, or from Hungary at the very end of the war. And she, when she got after Hannah was murdered, she was able. They were friends with a very famous Hungarian actress whose name escapes me right now, but she helped Catherine, be placed in a convent hospital. Nuns ran a hospital, and Catherine was able to survive to the end of the war in that hospital. And Giora had escaped over the Pyrenees Mountains to France, to Spain, and then to France. And he ultimately made it to Palestine, and then he came back to Europe with the British Jewish Brigade. But he was about to ship out, and it was the day that Hannah was about to leave on her mission. He arrived in Palestine, and they spent one day together before she left.
I know this film was released a few years ago, but do you remember how the film was received internationally, either in Hungary or in Israel?
It was received very well in Israel. It was very hard to penetrate Hungary. We had much more success with Who Wrote Our History and the reception in Poland.
Do you think political or like current events that impacted that, or?
I really don't know. It's what came out in 2008. So what is that? How many years ago is that? But I really felt very strongly that Hannah was a Hungarian hero, right? And I was disappointed that the film was not more widely seen and embraced in Hungary. As to why, I don't know. Maybe there were one or two anti-Semites left in Hungary. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm sure, I'm not in the film business, but I'm sure with every business, there are so many unknowns that could impact the reception of something. And we have a few questions in the audience about how does it feel to have brought something that was really an unknown story outside of Israel to light to so many people internationally?
Thank you for that question. It feels absolutely incredible. I have two really strong memories that speak to that. One was when we finished the film, we had a private screening, but at a fairly large theater in LA, a private theater in LA. And a lot of our donors were there, and friends and family were there, and Eitan was there. And it was the first time we had shown the film publicly, and I was sitting in the front. I hadn't heard a cough or a throat clearing. It was just like this total silence in the room, which was very hard to read. And when the film ended and the lights came on, there was this momentary, silence. It was like everyone was frozen. I thought, oh, I guess it didn't work, and then everybody just stood on their feet, and there was this enormous response, this enormous standing ovation. And of course, it was donors and friends, not only, but it was a very friendly audience. But then Eitan, I was at the podium to speak to the audience and do Q&A, and Eitan came walking down the aisle of the theater towards me with just tears streaming down his face, and we embraced, and he said, thank you, you did it. And you have to, I guess, you'd have to understand how what's a nice word I could use, how incredibly possessive Eitan was of Hannah's legacy. He loved Hannah and cared about her legacy so deeply. that he, the reason he was with me all the time is not because he loved my company, is he wanted to make sure I didn't mess up. So his feeling that, that we had succeeded and that we had managed to convey Hannah in a way that was true to her and was positive. His embrace of me and of the film was very, very meaningful to me. He was the main audience, right? If I could please Eitan, then I could pretty much do anything. And the second time I felt something like that was I had really wanted there to be an exhibit, a museum exhibit, which you all know something about, that would go with the film or, could travel with the film or vice versa. And Eitan agreed to do an exhibit. I approached the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York and they agreed to do it. And Eitan brought artifacts. And when that happened, when we had the opening of the museum exhibit, and Eitan was there again, and I think his brother David was there too, and their wives, it was really a wonderful feeling to feel that so many people will get to experience Hannah in these different ways. Her camera was there and some of her photographs and some of the diary. It was really quite wonderful.
It's thrilling to hear that, because I do think oftentimes history for a very long time was written primarily by men, and sometimes women's voices were lost along the way. And when you examine Holocaust history, there's so many incredible women, whether it's Irina Sendler or Hannah Senesh, who really took it upon themselves to risk their lives and do something. So I think it's an incredible opportunity that you were able to bring this to life and to bring it to film and cinema and ultimately have an exhibition where people could analyze the primary sources themselves. So that's...
And how many years later, whoever's here today, hopefully they all got a chance, and others who are not here today, you got a chance to see the film. It's a permanent archive, right? I mean, properly conserved, which I'm very worried about right now, but if properly conserved, film is a permanent archive, and I think a very moving and important one. Since I'm on the phone with Zoom with the museum, I won't say that film is the best way to tell Holocaust history or to preserve Holocaust history, but I will say, along with wonderful museums, it's an excellent way.
I think both together. There's only so much information we can provide and create narration for, but to be able to have a film where you actually hear the voices of people who knew Hannah, that's an incredible archival piece. And at the museum, we talk about Hannah Senesh, both in our gallery on The World That Was, representing Jewish life before the Holocaust, and also in Rescue and Resistance as a fierce female fighter who wanted to ensure continuation in life for her family and for her people and her community. So right. I think in unison, we can deliver a true archive.
Right.
So we have a few film questions in the audience, and people are interested in how you selected your editors. What was the editing process for the film? What was the most important questions you asked your editors before you hired them and entrusted them with this material? And if you have any advice for filmmakers today chasing down unknown stories.
Well, first of all, that's making an assumption that there were editors, plural. I have worked with one editor, Chris Collister, for my last 3 films. And he was an assistant editor on, I think he cut 4 films. And he was an assistant editor on the one before. And he is just such a wonderful human and such a brilliant filmmaker and editor. And he just puts his heart and soul into everything. And one of the reasons I also really value working with him is that he's not Jewish, and he's never even heard of Hannah Senesh. Before we started working together, he didn't know who Golda Meir was. So, and he's also much, I don't know, 20, 30 years younger than me. So he brings a perspective that's like, are we telling the story in a way that will really mean something to people who don't already know the story, that will cross over, that will engage audiences that, that we want to engage, younger people who might not know the history, people who aren't Jewish, people who, you want as broad an audience as possible. So we're always just trying to make the best film, because I feel that if the films are good, then they will cross over and they will reach people and they will impact, the world, hopefully in some small way. And something to say to filmmakers chasing down unknown stories. I would say that the most important thing is to just want to tell that story more than anything in the whole world. And if you think like, oh, this is a good story, I'd like to tell this, it's not going to happen. If you think, oh, I bet I can get money for this story. This would be a good story to tell because the Jewish foundations will love this. No, it won't happen. The only way to convince people to part with money that could otherwise go to, hungry people or sick children to give to a film is if you believe that this film has to be made, that you're the person to make it, and that the world it perhaps might not crumble if you don't tell the story, but it would be far poorer if you don't. You have to believe that it's the most important thing you could be doing with your time. And I think a secret for fundraising that took me many years to learn, somebody told me this a long time ago, but I've come to finally realize this. If you really believe in yourself and you think that you are well equipped to tell the story, and that the story is really, really important to be told, then you are offering something to your funders. It's not like you're a supplicant and they are the giver. You are exchanging things of value. You're providing the opportunity for meaning and for that funder to help create something important that they believe in, to concretize something. They are also the storytellers and the filmmakers, and they are providing you the means to do it. So, make sure that your funders are your partners and treat them with the respect that's due them, because they really are your partners.
I think it's so interesting what you were saying about telling really important stories that resonate with you, because a number of your films that I've seen are all stories that resonate with me, but are also stories that are kind of ones that I believe should be main media conversations, but oftentimes fall by the wayside. And I find that now there are so many people who come to me knowing that I work in a Holocaust museum and saying, have you ever heard of Emanuel Ringelblum? And obviously this is someone who I was I was familiar with the story from graduate school, but I want to thank you for bringing history to the community, because there's only so much that historians and museums can do, but for you to really give voice and give life, whether it's Hannah Senesh or whether it's Emanuel Ringelblum, I think that's just it's an incredible, I can see it. I can see that you really are passionate about these stories.
It really, really, really breaks my heart that people didn't know about Emanuel Ringelblum, or very few people did. Because to me, okay, this is hyperbole, but to me, he's like as important as Moses or Ben-Gurion, right? He's a huge figure in Jewish history. He truly loved the Jewish people, and he gave us something that is invaluable. So it just breaks my heart that he has, remained somewhat unknown. And there are many reasons for that, but it was really Sam Kassow's book that broke that silence. It wasn't me, it was Sam. I mean, he spent 12 years researching Emanuel Ringelblum and writing that book that, brought all those archival materials together and told the story in a really great way. And there's no way to compare the value of what I did to the value of what Sam did, because I couldn't have, there was no way to make the film without Sam and his book. I just tried to put it on film.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sometimes a disconnect between what historians research and produce and then what the public knows, and what you and Sam did bridged those two communities. Because I agree, Emanuel Ringelblum's story is it's a story of pure spiritual and intellectual resistance. And I mean, the same with Hannah Senesh, and these are two very well-known, in my world, people, but you gave them the opportunity to inspire those who might not be talking about the Holocaust every single day. And I think that's such an important part of what your films have done.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So we have also, there's a number of questions questioning about life in Israel for Hannah's family after 1945, after 1948. And I'm wondering, I know that you worked very closely with her nephew, if you could speak a little bit to what you know of what their life was like then.
Well, it was very difficult to live with the grief, especially, for both of them, for both Giora and for Catherine, and for subsequent generations. It's a grief that will not let go. And it's a responsibility that will not let go. Eitan told me a great story about his father. His father once went into a mattress store to buy a new mattress. And he, you know, whatever, he figured out the price with the store owner, and then he got out his checkbook and wrote, you know, Giora Senesh, and gave the guy the check, and he said, "Oh my God, are you the brother of Hannah Senesh? I'm going to give you a better price." And Giora got very angry. "You're going to give me a different price on a mattress because I'm Hannah Senesh's brother?" I mean, there was it was like the problem of fame, you know, in a weird way, because Israel so actively promoted her heroic image as a way to, you know, as part of state building. And so it was very difficult. And for Catherine too, I mean, you know, whatever, she was just never going to get over that. And then I would imagine that the relationship between Catherine and Giora was somewhat strange too, because, you know, Giora, maybe he was always trying to make up for Hannah's death, or maybe his children were trying to be the best grandchildren, but they were very close. I mean, Eitan told me that they went to his grandmother's every Friday night for Shabbat dinner, as many do in Israel. It's lovely. And, you know, that they would be asked to play the piano. I mean, she was a very formal Hungarian woman. And I think it's been really hard, especially, I mean, I think it was a big burden on Giora, and then it passed to his sons, David and Eitan, and I think they've done a great job, but it's been a big burden. And also there've been things like, there was a movie made, not to cast aspersions on any movies, but there was a movie made, a feature film made in the 80s, I think. And they were very unhappy with it. So, you know, it took a lot to convince them to trust me and to make the film. I negotiated with them for a year. They said no. And I called somebody who had been a lawyer for the book publisher, for the book when they did the film in the 80s. And he said, "You know what, you got to go. You can't do this but in email. You've got to go there. You've got to go and sit down with them." So I did. I didn't have any money, but I pull together money or whatever. That's what credit cards are for. And I flew to Israel and I sat down with Eitan. And in like 2 minutes, we knew it was okay. We loved each other. It was good. And that good feeling was, you know, carried us through the next 4 years or 5 years, whatever it was.
And did they play an active role in the film or in the narration, or picking which scenes that would be dramatically portrayed?
No. I mean, Eitan had a respect for the artistic process. He likes to paint, and he's, you know, I believe he's a photographer too, but he's definitely like to draw and paint. And his brother is a psychologist, or is he a psychiatrist? I can't remember now, but they're very sensitive, intelligent, very cool people. And they didn't want to be, tell me what to do. But as I said, Eitan was always around. He was there on shoots. He came to the editing room, and he didn't hold back in saying what he had to say. And I can't remember, did we ultimately have a disagreement that couldn't be resolved? But there was a lot of, you know, this, and I think ultimately it was good for the film.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it pushes all of us to kind of analyze and rethink what's going on. And when you were making the film, where did you film it? Did you film the scenes in Europe and Israel, on a lot in LA?
No, the scenes of her childhood we shot in Budapest, and the scenes of her in Israel we shot in Israel. And the interviews were all over the world.
And there are also a number of questions. People are very curious about what you're working on today. Are you working on another film? What's the subject? If you could share with us a little bit about your current projects.
So right now I am making a film for the Claims Conference on the historic Luxembourg agreements that resulted in survivors getting compensation, which, you know, was and probably remains a controversial subject. And I'm enjoying working with them very much. And I am helping to launch a new funding organization for Jewish films. I can't really tell you more about that, but it will launch officially in February. And I'm helping to launch and run that new organization. I am producing a film about Roman Vishniak by filmmaker Laura Bialis. And I am in serious development on a film on Abraham Joshua Heschel with his daughter, Susanna Heschel, a historian. She's a historian.
So what is it about Jewish history and Jewish stories that speak to you?
I don't know. I mean, I just love Jewish history. I love history, and I love Jewish history most of all. I find it endlessly fascinating. And I don't know, I guess I love Jewish history, and you know, if I could, I do nothing else but sit around and read Jewish history. I'm a little bit behind, you know, in reading Jewish literature. I'd like to do more of that. But I'm always reading for my films, history, so that's very occupying. And what was your other question?
I guess just I was asking what inspires you to tell these stories about Jewish history, and you know, I do think that traditionally in Judaism, oral history and storytelling are such an intrinsic part of our culture. And I was wondering if that kind of inspires you or resonates with you or leads you in this storytelling way of focusing on heroes from the history of Jews.
Well, you know, I find that there's not that many filmmakers who want to focus on the area of Jewish history. It's maybe not, in the larger world of film and independent film, maybe not considered super cool. But, you know, it got me in and it won't let go. And it started with Hannah, right? Because the first feature documentary I made was right before making Hannah, and I started a nonprofit with a woman, Lisa Thomas, who was very, very supportive, and we made a film about Native American subjects. And I had done a lot of work in Native American history in the past. And I told her the story of Hannah Senesh, and she was like, "Yes, let's tell that story." And you know, it just went on from there. And just got its hooks in me. I mean, why did you study Jewish history? Why are you a historian of Jewish history?
Well, I love history. So I guess how come you're a filmmaker and not a historian?
I like the popularizing nature of it. I like being able to take Sam's masterwork of history and translate it to a larger audience. I think that's awesome. I always really admired Barbara Tuchman, who did such a good job in writing popular books of deep history, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, I think you're succeeding, and I also think you're very cool. So
thank you very much.
Don't say that.
There wasn't an attempt to elicit that. Thank you.
Do you think that you and your own daughter will ever go parachuting together?
Absolutely not. I'm terrified of heights, and she's not allowed to. Still, even though she's much older now.
So I thank you so much for giving your time and your dedication for both to the people of the world, to educate them, to us tonight for discussing this film. Is there any last, note that you want to ensure that we take away from this? Is there something you want? Some of the people on our conversation may not have watched the film just yet. Is there something you want us to walk away with this story?
No, just go into it open-hearted and experience what you experience. I don't have an agenda for only, my only agenda is don't forget Hannah Senesh, don't forget Ringo Bloom. And by the way, Hava Nagila was an underdog like that too. It's the story that the song that everybody thought they hated, and then there's a deep story behind it. So it's the same theme. And by the way, I want to congratulate you because you just asked me a question that I've never been asked before. I've done thousands of Q&As, and that mother-daughter parachuting was really good.
I'm so glad. Sometimes, especially because I come from more of the history background and less of the film background, I always get very intimidated when speaking to filmmakers because I can tell you the historical relevance of Hannah Senesh all day, but I don't know if I could ever bring her story to a big screen that would excite and invite so many people. So it's really, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you and have you be our guest.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
And I apologize again for my computer glitch. Thank you for bearing with me. I don't know how many people dropped off at that point, but I hope that those who stayed enjoyed it. And thanks again, and good luck with everything that you're doing at the museum.
Thank you. And don't worry, I think in this modern day and age, we're all used to a computer going down or a baby screaming and all sorts of hilarious.
Or naked naked person walking by. And I'd be happy to report that my computer just came to life. So all's good in the world.
Great. I'm glad your computer is not gone down for the count. And we have thankfully, knock on wood, not have had any people walking behind us without needing to. I want to thank our audience for joining us today. As many of you know, Holocaust Museum LA might be closed. It might have closed its doors due to the pandemic, but we've never been more open. We are hosting programs like this every single week. We have 2 exciting programs that I just want to highlight coming up. On the 20th, we have a program called Inside the Acid-Free Box, which will be discussing an incredible collection of art from the Theresienstadt concentration camp, created by an artist who survived and they were reunited following the war. On the 28th, we have a virtual exhibition opening. The exhibition is also virtual, and it will be featuring David Lipkowski's artwork that is inspired by Shalom Aleichem. So if you love Jewish history and stories, this is definitely the program for you. We also have our virtual live stream special gala next week on the 21st. You can find out all of this information and more on our website, holocaustmuseumla.org. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you so much to everyone joining us. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Good night.